Welcome back to Disturbing the Priest. I am joined by a very, very awesome guest. Gene Hoglan, Dark Angel, new album out now, Extinction level event. It's killer. It kicks all the ass. I am really, really happy to be joined by Gene. How's it going, man?
Thank you, Brandon. I'm happy to be here. Happy to be here disturbing the priest. Heck yeah, man. Class.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're on, heading towards the end of our extinction level event tour across the US. We're coming into the homiest of stretches here. We got the final few shows, maybe 6 or 7 shows, 5 or 6 shows. And it's been a roaring success for us, and we're really excited to be here on the West Coast now for us anyway. So that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, this has been such a massive tour you guys have been on, and it's been going good this whole time.
Yes, it's been great. The shows have been awesome, and the fans are super into it. Like you can, if we, I haven't paid much attention to any kind of postings coming from us, but I know our vocalist Ron Reinhardt. He's in the pit every single night singing to the crowd. The pit's going around him, and he's getting just elbowed and smashed around in the pit with everybody. And so he spends as much time in the pit as he does up on stage. But yeah, it's been a great run. We've had a fantastic package, which has been rather evolving as the tour has progressed. We started the run with Sacred Reich, whom we still have with us, and also there was Hyrax and a young band from Louisiana called Void. Check them out.
Excellent. Yeah.
Then both of those bands split off to head over to Europe, and then we picked up the Mighty Violence. That's been killer, hearing them every night, and also Midnight, which those guys are some bruisers as well. So it's been it's evolved from one kick-ass package to another kick-ass package, and both equally devastating. So and I know that we're going to end up the run in Los Angeles with, I believe Hyrax is coming back for that. It's going to be a giant 5-band bill at the end. Oh, we also picked up a young band from South Carolina called Interceptor, a killer 3-piece, and they're definitely pretty Venom-esque. So yeah, check it out if you haven't come to a show yet. This is one of those shows where you don't want to miss it.
Yeah, just such an insane lineup that's following you guys. It's just really awesome to see. Yeah, so you're blending in these new songs now into the set list. How do you feel like these new songs are being received live, as well as like blending in with the legacy material?
Well, I tell you, this is one thing where it really kind of appears like, here's an example. This is just one of the examples where, like our young friends in Void. We have a song called Sea of Heads on the new record. And we've got, like, say, Joey from Sacred Reich, who's on the younger side. Sacred Reich, they're a bunch of dudes, definite experienced metal veterans, and Joey is their youngest dude. And both Joey and Void, they're like, we love the old stuff. Yeah, all that, it's great, but God, the new stuff, that's for us, man. Holy moly, that song, Sea of Heads. I mean, they're out there holding banners every night saying Sea of Heads and singing along with it and getting the whole crowd to chant Sea of Heads, things like that. So, and that is that is one of the songs that kind of sticks out from the other ones on Extinction level event a little bit. And so the new stuff, it really seems like the younger crowd is like, they're like, that's the album we're discovering Dark Angel with. We weren't around when you were releasing, Darkness, Time, Leave Scars, even We Have Arrived, of course. But they're like, we're here for this new album, and this is our Dark Angel. This is the one. This is the Dark Angel that we're discovering. So that's pretty bonus for us. The old heads who are all into the old stuff, man. I'm they come and talk to me about the new record, and they're like, we love the new album. You know, it's kick ass. You know, you guys didn't slouch with it, and I, I would imagine there's probably people out there that are like, man, they didn't repeat Darkness Descends, or they didn't repeat Time Does Not Heal. I'm familiar with that stuff, and they didn't do that again. So this new stuff sucks. I don't know. That's part of the course that's happening, but you know, I mean, that's where I love the new material. We love the new material. We're stoked with it, so we're proud to represent Dark Angel with this new record. So that's where I stand with it anyway. So that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, like this is the first Dark Angel release where like I am like alive for. So, you know, to get this new album is like really exciting. And I know what you mean. It's like there are those legacy fans who, you know, grew up with the older material, and that's like they're so tied to that old sound, and it's more of a nostalgic thing than like actually is it good, is it bad. And it's like you'll never be able to impress those fans, unfortunately. But as someone who's like going into this like completely fresh, this is a killer record, and I really hope all these songs stay in the rotation when you guys play live. Just excellent stuff. Really digging this new release.
Very much. That's awesome, man. Thank you, Brandon. That's very cool.
Yeah. So, you know, you've had a very, I'm trying to think how to say it. You've done a lot in your career. You've been in many bands. You've done many projects. You've done a lot. And I'd love to dive into like some of those key moments and then really dive into Extinction level event.
Sure.
I believe at 11 years old is when you started drumming, if that's correct.
Well,
Right?
I
It was 11.
suppose I don't think I had even played on a drum set by 11, but I already knew what I wanted to do, which was play drums for a living, be in bands, be a traveling musician. That's when the early spark was hitting, where you know I read an interview with Peter Criss of Kiss, who was my hero at the time, and he said, you know, when I was a young kid, I went to my parents and I said, Mom, Dad, I'm going to be in a rock band. I'm going to be playing Madison Square Garden, you know, before you know it. And I saw that quote, and so that's when I was like, hey, good enough for him, good enough for me. I went to my folks and said, hey, I'm going to be doing the same thing. And my folks were kind of like, hey, wait a minute, why don't you get an education? And you know, you're starting to show some pretty decent talent at baseball, so why don't you consider that? And you know, it was just for me, by the time I was 13, that is when I played on a couple of drum kits at the time. I got my first drum kit at age 13, and that's when I really cemented in the fact that I wanted to be a metal drummer, because I was 12 and 13 in the year 1980, which if you look up the historically greatest year of heavy metal ever, that's 1980 is pretty classic. You know, you had a lot of fantastic debut albums from a lot of bands that just have become legends, and a lot of great records from other bands who also became legends. So 1980 was my you know, gateway year to metal, and what a great year that was. And so just being a very young drummer and just being a sponge for music more than anything. Like, I loved metal, but I loved all music. So you know, the stuff that I was coming into, that I was coming from, was kind of like, I suppose the classic rock era of the late 70s, you know, with all the Cheap Tricks and Ted Nugent and Aerosmith, Van Halen and Queen and Kiss and you name it. You know, all of that had a big influence on my rock and rollness. And before that, I was super into the AM pop radio, which, you know, probably doesn't even exist anymore, you know, except on maybe Sirius XM on the 70s channel or something like that. But, you know, that's where my love for drums came from, you know, very early, you know, when I was in second grade and just tapping on my desk and driving my teachers crazy and all that kind of stuff. And I've mentioned this many times that I taught myself how to play drums by air drumming, you know, and I took it real seriously. It's not like I was just flailing around, thrashing about, but I was like, really, you know, I was like, I had pretty extensive record collection. So I'd be playing the Rush albums and the Pat Travers Live, Go For What You Know albums, and Gino Vanelli, Brother to Brother, and King Crimson, and all those aforementioned bands from earlier. Just playing along to those, just air drumming, teaching myself what the drummer was doing on all those bands. What Neil Peart was doing. Neil Peart was my definitely my favorite drummer at that point. By the time I was 11, 12. 13 kind of thing. And just he was a very understandable drummer for me. There were some of the prog and jazz fusion drummers that those guys are way out in left field for me. But Neil Peart was very graspable. It's like, hey, I'm from 2112 all the way through, Farewell to Kings, Hemispheres, all their early stuff and all their later stuff, the Moving Pictures record, that's about the last Rush album that I was super duper into. But I could understand what he was playing, and so he was one of my teachers. A lot of these drummers were Tommy Aldridge, Cozy Powell, Wacko Hunter from Raven, Rob Reiner from Anvil, Filthy Animal Taylor. I was really into double bass. A lot of those three last drummers there were all pretty double bass heavy drummers. So that was what was really getting me into my next phase. So getting some prog rock chops along with the kick-ass double bass, Les Binks from Judas Priest, a lot of double bass drummers. I was super into that, so all the Cozy Powells and guys like that. So that's where my musical evolution started, and so it just kind of carried on from there.
What was the first time you ever played a double bass drum? That you ever sat on an actual kit of a double bass?
Well, I can tell you a really fun story about that, and that is, it's a pretty well-known story now. But when I was, I don't know, 16, 15, maybe, probably 16 by then, I went over to a Slayer rehearsal, and at Tom's parents' garage, and Dave had pulled out a double bass on his kit. He pulled out a second bass, and I've been hanging out with Slayer for a year by then, and he was always a single bass player. He tracked Show No Mercy with a single bass, but their new material was calling for double bass, and so I was like, Dave, cool, man, you got the double bass together, kick ass, that's awesome, and he was like, yeah, I do, but I'm just not getting it. I'm really frustrated right now. I'm not grasping this. I'm a single bass player and just trying to do, just driving him nuts at the time. And I was like, well, I don't know. Let me take a seat. Let me see what you're trying to do and see if I can help. And so sat behind his kit, and I knew what he was trying to play, kind of that little double bass piece in Praise of Death from Hell Awaits, or the chorus of Angel of Death. I knew that's kind of what he was trying to get. And so I just sat there, I played that beat, and I just flew at it. And he's like, dude, man, yes, that's just what I'm trying to do. What are you doing? And he's like, first he's like, wait a minute, when did you get double bass? I've been to your house, I played your kit, you're a single bass player. How long have you been playing double bass? And I'm like, I don't know, what time is it? I look at my watch and I'm like, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, this is it, and he's like, well, dude, it's on. Show me what you're doing. Tell me what you're doing. Let's, I'm like, yeah, sure. Well, and then I just started going a laundry list of, well, here's what I'm concentrating over here. This landing with that, this landing with that, making sure you're at a good angle. I'm just giving them all these just off the top of my head. So as Dave put it, I became his drum tutor. I remember he used that word, tutor. And, so that was just about it, just getting them through the double bassing. I was there for the recording of the Haunting the Chapel EP, and just giving them just yelling out inspirational things for him during like songs like, Haunting the Chapel and things like that. So that was my first time ever playing on a double bass kit was Mr. Lombardo. So there you go.
And I'd love for you to more like elaborate on like how much of an effect that had as like on you as a musician, because not only are you teaching them, but you're getting more experience on the kit. You're probably seeing how like touring works as well. It was probably such you're the teacher, but you're really learning quite a lot on that tour.
Absolutely. Yeah, I learned so much. And the most important thing that I learned was to drastically alter my idiotic personality that I was when I was 16 years old, because I was a terrible tech. I wasn't Dave's drum tech. I was their lighting. I can't even call it designer. I was their light guy on the because I mean they were playing some pretty small clubs. I remember they played Portland here after legendary shows that they played. I remember they played here with the band Mace. And I was a terrible tech, and I also I was just an idiot, and they knew it, and they responded to that kind of, like I was just a young, stupid kid. I remember, because I was so into rock and roll when I was young, from ages 8, 9, 10, 11. I had subscriptions to all the American magazines like Cream magazine and Circus, and I buy the Circus magazine every week when I could, and buy the Hit Parader magazines when there was somebody cool in those magazines. These are all probably defunct magazines by now, maybe
Yeah.
online, but those were all print mags for us back in the day. And I would read interviews with rock stars or whatever, and they would always ask me, "Hey, what's life on the road like? What's it like being on the road?" And it's like none of them ever said like, "I'm living the dream. This is great. This is amazing. This is all I ever wanted." It's like each of these rock stars, just all they ever said was like, "Being on the road is so hard. You're away from your home. You're away from your loved ones, your wife, your kids. This is so challenging. The schedule, the your late nights, early mornings, plane flights, this and that and the other. It's just so hard being on the road." And that just filled my brain with all this kind of nonsense. And so when I'm on the road with Slayer, I'm just like, "Oh, this is so tough. Well, I can't wait to be back at home." And they're like, "We think this is great. What the hell are you talking about, kid? Like this is your first tour and you're not cut out for touring, are you?" And I remember when it was shortly after that tour, like I remember I would go on stage with Slayer for sound check. I played Dave's drums during sound check. I do little line checks for him, do the sound checks for him, and we play a couple of tunes, Jeff, Carrie, Tom, and myself, just so Dave could be out in the front of house and like, watch the catch what Slayer sounds like, kind of thing, what your drums sound like in the front of house. Drummers don't usually get to do that. Usually, a guitarist, you got your wireless. You could walk out to the front house by the sound man, check out what the sound sounds like. Your vocalist, if you're just a singer, you sometimes got a wireless mic. You can walk out there and hear what you sound like. Drummers never get to do that. So, hey, Dave, go out there. I'll play your drums and see see what you think. And I remember Jim Durkin was telling me well after the fact. He's like, "Yeah, when you got off the road, we were looking at you to play drums for Dark Angel." And so I called up Carrie and said, "Hey man, you played with Gene, like how is he? How is he as a drummer?" And Carrie said, "Good drummer, whiny kid." And so Jim was like, "Oh, all right, well, duly noted." And they asked me anyway. And it was, I learned so much from that initial tour, because that was Slayer's first tour. And, I was fortunate to be on it. And it was just a small West Coast run. But it taught me a whole lot of like, you really have to just work on your personality, dude. You got a bunch of other people that you're going to be hanging around and being around. And it took me a number of years to work on my personality, but you know, it wasn't until I joined Death where I actually, you know, got my personality in order. You know, during the early Dark Angel days, I was a taskmaster, you know, because this was my dream. This was my goal. Like it became, you know, I was already into what I was doing. This is what I wanted to do. So all that nonsense I was spouting was I was just reading it by rote, you know, kind of spouting off by rote. You know, I memorized these old quotes from these old rock stars, applied them. That was stupid. But with Dark Angel, you know, I was just so focused. I was such a young, focused dude that I had to just keep, um, you know, keep my, well, I was just really disciplined and really, you know, I didn't drink, do drugs, party, any of that, you know. So when Dark Angel was on the road, usually at the end of the night, I'd be grabbing the guitar, sitting in the back of the van, the RV, the bus, whatever, and just writing riffs, you know, putting stuff together for the next album. So that was my focus with Dark Angel, and I still retain that focus to a large degree, you know.
For sure. Yeah. And like that Slayer tour was almost like boot camp for you, it seems, which is just like really funny to hear. And it just did so much for you. Now, you know, Darkness Descends and Dark Angel, of course, you mentioned the early days. And like generally, what was that like creative chemistry between members, especially for that, like, you know, first three records?
Well, I remember when I joined, I was into all the heavy Savage stuff because I was a metal fan, and bands that had demos out at the time, and yeah, not even albums necessarily, were bands like Possessed, of course, loved them. Um, Destruction, yes, you know, Creator was putting out stuff. I think they were called Tormentor at the time. And I was just all into the underground of metal, you know, like Metal Church, and you know, of course, Metallica had you know, the Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning. Those were killer records, and Slayer had Show No Mercy out, and I was there for the recording of a lot of that album too. You know, in the studio with those guys then, and you know, so I was just into all the heaviest stuff around. And Jim Durkin was all, you know, he was the leader of Dark Angel at that point. He was also into the heavy stuff. So when I joined, he had a partner in crime, you know, to push everything to elevate it just heavier and more extreme. And the extremity that Darkness Descends wasn't by design. It just sort of evolved into that. And I just remember, you know, I remember I used to eat caffeine pills, like what was it, Vivarin. I wasn't much of a coffee fan, but I didn't do drugs, but I guess caffeine, you know, drinking the Cokes or eating, I'd eat caffeine pills before we go on stage. That would give me just, I get probably too much energy, like where I always used to feel that when you're playing Dark Angel music, you're playing the Savage stuff, your double basses are going as fast as you can. You have to push everything to its absolute extremity where you're just at the very edge of your just, and, which is pretty high energy, very vicious, very powerful kind of approach. And there wasn't a YouTube back then. There wasn't something where you can go back and just listen to yourself. You're playing at the maximum of your ability, but you're not overextending yourself. So if somebody would ever come down and film with a, you know, big old camera kind of thing, you know, one of those VHS kind of cameras back in the day, and you'd be able to watch your video, or you'd get the video after the show from whatever venue, and you'd see, wow, we are really, really, really fast. It doesn't feel that fast. Darkness Descends was so slowed down in terms of you know, just velocity. We had to slow that down. So that's where, you know, our producer engineer Randy Burns had said, guys, you know, you're just, that's cool. You can play it as fast as you are, but you might want to just kind of, you know, have some form of clarity, or else it would have just been this even faster than it was, you know. So um, so there was a united front from Jim Durkin and myself, because we both wrote, you know, a ton on Darkness Descends and Leave Scars as well. And by the time Jim had departed the band in 1989, and we were able to grab our friend Brett Erickson from the band Viking, um, I was just kind of placed into the chief songwriter role, I guess. So, Brett and I just, we wrote a lot of the times on heel material together. So there was a lot of approaches that I tried to take back then that I just wanted to be a Dark Angel approach. Like how you got the double bass machine gun doing some crazy patterns kind of thing, and the guitar riff is doing the pattern, on the chunking the E on top of it with the matching pattern of the bow. I'd never heard anybody do that before. So on Leave Scar, even on Darkness Ascends, I tried to do that on Darkness Ascends. I couldn't get really anybody to kind of follow me. So when I started really like putting that kind of concept together, I just, I thought, well, shoot, this is something I don't hear anybody else doing. So this could be Dark Angel's approach. This could be our little addition to the canon of metal, where it's like, hey, Dark Angel did this thing on all their records, double bass, doing crazy military patterns with military guitar chunks over the top of them. And then I kept kind of doing that during the Death era, kind of thing. But that was an approach that, like I said, it was a novel approach. I'd never heard anybody do it. So I was like, hey, Dark Angel, we got a thing, so there you go.
Yeah, it's just so cool to hear, and I love that element of Dark Angel. Now, you talked about taking the caffeine pills live, which is just like really funny to hear. And I believe the first gig you ever did with them was on New Year's with Hyrax. I believe so. It's funny that we've come full circle here. You're back on the road with Hyrax for like a few gigs. What are your memories of that first gig with Dark Angel?
I remember being terrified, and I remember like the band had to kind of talk because I was so scared, and the band had to talk me into staying. Like I'm going home. I can't take this, man. I'm freaking out. I'm losing my mind, and the band had done a million gigs by then, Dark Angel had, and I was a 17-year-old kid, and these guys were just absolutely grown-up adult 20-year-olds at the time. So, 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds, they were like total adults, and they're like, just shut up, you're going to be fine. Stuck around, did the show, of course. And I remember when I went on stage, like it was a tiny place called Radio City in Orange County, and California, of course. And I remember being scared, but the second I got on stage, the crowd's energy, like it was filled, it was a packed show. It's a small venue, probably 300 people at max, probably, I guess. It was a huge venue to me at the time. I didn't know any better, but it was a well-known place. And so the entire just pit front row was just, tons of fans screaming. My kid is just this far away from the front row there, so their energy, I matched it, and it was great, and I loved it. And it was, I was like, yeah, definitely you're on the right path here, Hoglan. So that was really cool. This was back in the day. There wasn't thrashing back in the day. Back in this time, there was not pits going on per se, really. This is this is late '84. There was not pits. There was seas of headbanging heads. From front to back, everybody headbang. That's kind of why the song "Sea of Heads" from the new album, that's written about a sea of headbanging heads. People at festivals, or people at just a full sea of just a packed dance floor of headbangers headbanging. That's what that song is about. So there you go.
That's awesome. Now, of course, you mentioned Death, and those legacy Dark Angel records are just amazing. And this new record is awesome too. Before we get into that new era of Dark Angel, of course, you were in Death with some doing some legendary records with Death. And, I'd love for you to kind of talk about your transition out of Dark Angel. How do you look back at that?
Well, I always, when I was in Dark Angel, it's like I knew that I was going to, no matter whatever happened, and hey, bands break up, bands dissolve, bands go their separate ways, and I always knew that. And growing up being the kind of drummer who idolized guys like Tommy Aldridge, Cozy Powell, guys like that, Terry Bozzio, who would bounce from band to band to band, that was never an odd thing to me for a drummer to be like, hey, he was in this band on this album, then he's on this band with this other record, and then he joined this other band after that. So I'm like, well, I love those guys, and they carved themselves out pretty decent careers. So I would not be surprised if, hey, Dark Angel is not my final stopping point in a band. So I realized that pretty early on. So when Dark Angel decided to kind of just go with separate ways, there was no acrimony involved at all. That was just kind of, it just circumstances led to us just, moving in different directions. And that's where I was in the midst of just trying to get a new project together. And I got a call from Boy Kurgan from Blabbermouth saying, hey man, I was talking with Chuck, your name came up, he's looking for a drummer, and what do you think? And long story short, I was like, yeah, man, definitely. Let's, Chuck and I will get together. Let's chat about this. Chuck and I knew each other for a long time before that. We'd been on tour together, Dark Angel and Death, and Chuck was a part of the underground tape trading scene. We were pen pals back in the day, kind of thing. And so, that's I knew Chuck already. So when we got together to do, just another long story short, we decided to move forward with the individual thought patterns record, and Chuck sent me out a riff tape of tunes, and I just kind of, there was no drums on those, and he did not have any experience on programming a drum machine at the time, so it was just it was a riff tape where he played a couple guitars on it, and that thing, and so, but it was enough to kind of get the songs going in my head, and that's where I started realizing that, wow, I could write drums. I never worked out any of the parts on drums before I went out to Florida to start working on the record. So that's kind of where the individual thought patterns kind of approach came from, was just having a riff tape, getting riffs and beats in my head. And that was one thing that I always was trying to do with Dark Angel that I was hopefully able to carry forward with Death, was try to write beats that aren't familiar. Try to, if the standard beat would work here, try to go over here with a beat. Try to come up with something that just isn't very common. It's just try to create beats that nobody has heard before, So that's where individual came from with that approach. And, I think there are some beats on there. It's like, hey, never heard that beat before. And like With Darkness Descends or Time Does Not Heal, just trying to keep that approach from the drummer standpoint. But that was one thing that it allowed, working with Death allowed me to become a drummer, like a proper drummer. Because with Dark Angel, the drums were becoming such a secondary notion to me with Dark Angel, because I was writing the majority of the riffs and playing a lot of the guitar on the records and all that stuff. So I had to have my guitar chops super high. So I was playing way more guitar than drums back in those days. And so drums were just kind of becoming a secondary instrument for me, but a necessary one. So when I joined Death, I was able to solely concentrate on drums and really put all my focus, all my energies into trying to come up with really just cool, hopefully creative or catchy drum beats. I mean, we did refer to my drums on Symbolic as lead drums because of lead guitar.
Yeah. I can hear it. Like Symbolic, it has some of my favorite drumming ever, man. And it's just, why I love talking about this part of your life too, is because it's like you take a little piece of these projects with you when it comes to the next one. So what I love about Extinction Level Event is like, it's just so cool to compare that style of drumming to like the legacy records. And it's like, wow, like you've come such a far way and you've picked up so many parts of these past projects you were in and can contributed it to this, like, extinction level event. It really feels like this has come full circle, like this your whole career. So, learning about these things are really cool to me. Symbolic is one of my favorite metal records ever. And I believe it was on your 28th birthday
That's
you
right. Yeah.
recorded. What do you remember generally about like the writing and recording process of that record?
With that album, individual, it was kind of the polar opposite of individual thought patterns because individual, there was a looming deadline that was coming pretty quick for Chuck. And so we had to put that album together in, I always think it was about 3 weeks or so of, solid jamming. And I remember thinking at the times, we put this album together in 3 weeks, like cursing and all that stuff. That's amazing. And now I look back at that and I've said this before, I think that's adorable. Getting 3 weeks to work on a record, my God, that's amazing. A lot of times I am learning the album as I'm on the plane flight to the session, or I'm driving up from San Diego to LA for the session. I'm listening to the demos for the first time of the album I'm about to go record, kind of things. And so done that with Dethklok a number of times, let me tell you, and Brandon Battick and things like that,
Wow.
So where the first time I'm playing the drums for songs are when I'm actually tracking them. And so that has had to create this kind of this sort of level of expertise, I don't know, but where you have to make songs sound like they've been lived in for months and months and months, and just not where you're like, you have 2 hours to get this song together and make it sound like it has been lived in for and loved and fussed over and all the parts just detailed and worked out. You have 2 hours to learn this song and record it. And then after that, you got another 2 hours for the next song, and then another 2 hours for the next song, and then so on and so forth until you got 20 songs recorded for this record, whatever it might be. That's kind of a lot of the approaches that I've had to take, and so it kind of started with individual being, hey, we had 3 weeks to put this thing together, and for Symbolic, and I do believe that this is apparent on Symbolic, we got a lot of time to work on all those tracks, and that's why for me, I've said this before, the individual thought patterns kind of sounded like a bull in a china shop in terms of like taste and groove and feel. It just sounds like rushed and hurried and kind of thing for me. And that's why Symbolic, it settled a little bit. It kind of, all the songs just kind of sat, they were able to get a little more of a groove together, not just pushed and just intense. The songs had a little bit of breathing room, I guess, so that's the difference there, because we got a number of months to put Symbolic together, 6 months, 9 months, something like that. But I remember, I think we started tracking the album on my 28th birthday. We'd spent, my whole 27s taking care of Symbolic writing. And I remember throwing my back out the day before we went in to record. And that was like probably the first time I ever did that, threw my back out, and I could not walk. I could not move. I could not, the only thing that I could do was play drums. It didn't affect my drumming, but I had my drum tech at the time, Steve Good, on one shoulder, and I had Chuck on the other shoulder, just like helping me off the drum throne and get me into the control booth when we're done recording. And it's like I'm sitting in this just like cockamamie position and checking out the songs, like, is that good? Okay, it's good. Let's go take care of the next one. And so that whole few days of recording probably took 4, 5 days to record, which is pretty luxurious back in those days. A lot of times I had 1 day to record drums, 2 days, kind of thing. And afterwards, many times you have to record, the entire City album from Strapping the Land, all those songs recorded in 1 day. Every Strapping record the drums were recorded in 2 days maximum, kind of thing.
That's wild. I can't believe with that injury, with not being able to like move, you were still able to like drum on the kit. That's like crazy to me.
That was
Yeah.
crazy. That's
Yeah.
just the force of will. You know, like I
Yeah.
make sure that I get this done because it's, the session never moves forward until the drummer's done. We weren't
Right.
tracking with a click track or anything like that. So you have to have those drums done before anybody else gets to do anything. And so that's where a lot of that pressure is on the drummer back in those days. Nowadays, that pressure isn't really so much there because, I mean, you could have an entire album completed and then you come in to do the drums because it's all the click track. And like I remember Dethklok's Doomstar Requiem, the clock opera, much of that was already done to click track. That's one of those examples where I'm like, I'm learning the songs on the plane flight coming home from whatever tour I was on. And then the next morning, I arrived that night. Next morning, I'm driving up from San Diego to LA to track the entire record in a day or two. Because I remember when I tracked that album, this was in like it was supposed to be released on like in October, like for Halloween, right around there. This was in September when I was recording drums, and usually things don't work like that. Usually you got your album done 6 months before it's released, but they had all the animation was ready to go and everything was ready to go. So that album was done to a click track. So I just came in and played drums to the click track to a lot of completed tracks, which was really helpful. If you give the drummer as much information as you can, oh, here's where the vocals go. Here's where one little vocal sticks out. Let me kind of put an accent right on that thing. I love that. I'd much rather have it out. You do everything, put it to click track, let me come in, and then I've just got it done. I got to do the Bear McCreary albums, all that stuff. Usually he sends me over completed things, and that's really cool. I'm able to, accentuate a lot of the drums to push things, push dynamics and create dynamics around vocals, around like certain riffs or things. And so that's how that works. And so just having symbolic, you got to get this, you got to get it done, before Chuck can move forward and
I
everybody
love
else.
Yeah, yeah. I love the image of you on a plane with like the headphones and the aviators, just like air drumming,
All right.
getting ready to like play these records. It makes me appreciate the albums even more. Like the fact that you literally on the plane ride are like just like memorizing these like the drums and everything. It's really, really crazy to me that like that's what you had to do. But just before we move on to this, extinction level event, what is your favorite memory of Chuck?
Well, just I mean, getting to create a lot of kick-ass metal. We had, especially during the symbolic era. Chuck at heart was a pretty gentle soul. He was definitely into animals and gardening, tending to his garden, and hanging out with his girl Kim, and just chilling out at the end of the night, catching Simpsons. He was a Simpsons fan kind of thing, and he would cook us meals every night. And I remember when we first got together for individual thought patterns, I'd been on started this kind of weight loss journey at the time, and Chuck was like, "Hey man, I see you're dropping some pounds, man. What are you doing?" And I'm like, I explained to him what I was doing. I went fat free at the time. Not a good way to do it, but it was working. I've learned since then that's not the way you want to go. But he patted his own gut. He's like, I can stand to lose a few pounds. Tell you what, I'll start cooking us fat-free, stuff every night. I'll start paying attention to the fat content on things, and we'll start having low-fat meals, and I'll cook them every night. And that's why I think there's on my special thanks list when I'm thinking like the rest of the guys in the band. I think I put Chuck, best cook in death metal, best chef in death metal or something like that. He was a great chef, and he enjoyed cooking, and so just really putting like I remember the kind of the rehearsal times for both albums quite a bit, and that was just a really good time. From Chuck not having a recording capability for pre-individual thought patterns to when we're rehearsing individual thought patterns. Scott Burns supplied Chuck with a 4-track machine, like a Fostex or a Roland or whatever was around then. Chuck getting to know that a little bit. And then by the next album, he had gotten himself an 8-track machine, which is pretty high tech for the time. So getting to kind of learn that thing and, programming, like that's what I would do is we would write all these songs. And then when it came time to recording back then, there wasn't a real good way to record drums on an 8-track machine. They always sounded just, pretty bad. We didn't have great mics or anything or really, the knowledge how to pull off getting a good drum sound. So what I would do is we'd rehearse these songs during the day, and then at night, Chuck and I would be hanging out, and I'd be programming them on my Alesis HR-16, which is kind of the top of the line, top level drum machine at that point. And I got pretty good at that, where I could make it sound pretty human-like. And so some of those songs are on one of the re-releases of Symbolic. I know there's a B-side of demos and things like that where it was there was a B-sides of us playing the demos and things like that. So hey, if you need something, Tony, go get your stuff. So yeah, so that just happened. So that was
so cool. Awesome. So all right, Extinction level event. Murmurs and rumors of a new Dark Angel album were around for years. So truly, how long was this album like in the works for? Like, what year did the initial conversation start of putting out a new record?
That would have been probably around 2014, and all it was there wasn't really a conversation, but at one point, Jim Durkin took me aside, maybe the guys or whatever, and he played me this tune that he had. He's like, "Hey man, I just wrote this song, pretty recently, but this was the most Dark Angel type song I've written in a long time." Because Jim always kept writing after he was not with the band, and he had his band Dreams of Damnation, and even after that band, kind of ended up however it ended up. He would write some songs and he'd send some over to me and stuff. And, it was not quite the classic kind of Dark Angel approach anymore. But this song, however, it had a working title at the time, which was not Extinction Level Event. But that song ended up being the song Extinction Level Event, at least from the musical standpoint. And I was so excited when I heard it. And I have a demo on disc of 4 tracks, 8 tracks of what was going to become the next Dark Angel record, which was going to be called Atrocity Exhibition. I've said it before, but I think Gary Holt and I read the same book. Like that's where Exodus's Atrocity Exhibition came from. It's a book, and so. I had a number of songs. We had an album's worth of material on demo form. I handed that disc over to Jim, played it for him, and he freaked out over it. He was like, "My God, this is our next album right here. This is our new album. Yeah, man." And I was like, "Well, that's cool and all. However, this song that you just wrote is kick-ass. I love the approach, the energy of it, and I know that this album's worth of material that I just showed you. This stuff is over 20 years old because this was all written before 1990, the end of 1992, and this was already 2014. So it's like 22, 23-year-old material. How about we just take the approach of let's write from here on out and see how that goes?" And he's like, "Okay, that works for me." And so Jim and I would get together when I could and when he could. He had himself a very, very lucrative career outside of the music industry when he departed Dark Angel the first time back in 1989. And so, he was the head of a company. And that took a lot of his time and his energy and things. But when I was not on the road, I mean, there would be times when I'd get off the road for like say a week in between this tour with one band, another tour with another band or whatever, you don't have a lot of time. I would always try to jab in at least one day with Jim. Let's get together, just throw some riffs around and that kind of thing and see what we could do. And so that was very cool. We never really got the chance to super focus and concentrate, because he'd be coming home after work, and San Diego to Los Angeles is a 2.5 hour car ride both ways. So I was spending 5 hours in the car to go up, come back. And so we would try to do what we could on a lot of these days. And so towards the end of the pandemic, when I had a pretty decent window to work on material, that is when it was a little challenging to get a hold of Jim. And I've said it before, it was not uncommon for Jim to like kind of disappear from the text threads or the email threads or phone calls not getting returned. And Jim had always told us, he's like, when we put the band back together, he's like, hey guys, I'm gonna try to make every single, run that we do, every kind of show that we do. And we were kind of doing the weekend warrior kind of approach with Dark Angel, going over playing a couple of festivals over in Europe or going down to South America, playing a festival, coming back, going to play just one show here and there. And he had said, look, there's going to be times when I cannot make it. I'll disappear. And like, we understand, Jim. We know that. And so when I had my window to start writing, Jim was a little bit incommunicado at the time. So what I did is I just started work, and I just leave him notes. I'd send him a text or I'd send him an email or whatever, just say, I'm going to keep moving forward. I got the window to work. I've been slowly just kind of compiling some riffs to get some things started over the past few months. And so I'm going to start working on some material, and I've worked with Laura Christine for, now 18 years now, and so her influence on my writing, her style, I absorbed some of that, and I definitely. She actually helped me write some of the riffs on the record. She wrote the coolest riffs on the record, if you ask me. I love Laura's riffs. We have a project outside of Dark Angel that we've been working on for some time. I love her riffs. So
what riffs specifically?
What's that?
What riffs specifically?
Well, let me see. I mean, there's like the intro to Sea of Heads. I accidentally stole that from one of our songs. And, it took her a while to figure that out. I was just writing riffs, and then she's like, hey, man, it's right out of one of our songs there. You understand this, right? And I'm like, oh, shoot, I did not know, So, there's like the opening riff to E Pluribus Nemo. That's a killer riff.
Yeah.
The chorus riff to Scalar Weaponry. She had written that in single note form, but then I put the Jim Durkin approach of we call them partials, but they're double stops.
Cool.
I put that approach to there, and her influence is definitely all over, like Woke Up the Blood. I know. Oh, she helped me with the tag of the chorus of Apex Predator. I had some different tag, and she's like, why don't you try this thing? I was like, oh, that's so much better than what I got. And so, she is my musical partner as well. So she's going to come to me and just, shoot it straight. Like, dude, that's killer. That's great. And she will also shoot it straight. Like, dude, I don't think that's a good riff. I don't think that's a good piece of something that you're working on. Quality control, in-house quality control. We do the same for each other, and I trust her instincts definitely. So there you go, So that was just, we had a small window. So what I would do is I know Jim Durkin's musical style, his guitar playing style very well. So I always try to write with like what would Jim do sort of approach. even if Jim's riffs aren't exactly on this song, his style, his approach, the spider chords. Jim taught me the spider chord back in 1984. I'd never seen the spider chord before, like the intro to Promise of Agony off Lead Scars.
Yep.
That's spider chord, and that's actually me playing guitar on that because I was the one who was in the studio that day playing that thing, and I wrote the weirdo spider chord after it. It's this weird one that's not just unison dropping. It's a so it's got this weird approach. I've got the independence to these two fingers, I suppose, but the spider chord is represented. The double stop partials are represented, and that was always a Jim Durkin approach to me. Like I said, with that spider chord, I don't. I know Jim played with Megadeth for a while, and it's I remember having a discussion with Dave Ellefson, recently, where he's like, yeah, Dave Mustaine wrote the spider chord, and I believe Junior, I believe Mr. Ellefson, but like I said, at that point, Jim Durkin was the one that did that for me, because I wasn't all that. I mean, I loved Megadeth at the time, but as for actual guitar playing, I wasn't sure where I'd hear, spider chords from, kind of thing.
Right, and I always think of Dark Angel when I hear those. Like it's so ingrained in the band's sound. Right. It really is.
Absolutely, and a lot of the the hammer-ons, the half step hammer-on, the beginning of Perishing Flames and Darkness Descends and No One Answers with all the hammer-ons. I try to get a few of those things in there too with this new record. And that was the only, and it wasn't even a challenge. I mean, to make a Dark Angel album sound like Dark Angel, I'm okay. I'm pretty good at doing that. Had enough of an impact on the writing with Dark Angel, and having Jim as an inspiration to write, so that's what I would do. I was just, when Jim was a little bit hard to get a hold of, I had told him, look, I'm just going to write. I'm going to keep writing. I got a window to write right here. I've cleared my schedule. I'm not doing any sessions. I'm not doing any touring. I'm not working with anybody else for this section of time until we get this material written, learned, and then at least the drums and the basic tracks recorded. I've got my schedule open. So I just took that period of time and just focused solely on Dark Angel music. And I would put the song, I worked with GarageBand on my iPad, Laura is good with Pro Tools. Laura taught herself Pro Tools to play on the Bear McCreary record like she did. She taught herself Pro Tools. That was just over my bandwidth, over my brain. That was over my pay grade of what I could learn. But GarageBand, really easy. You take an iRig, you got a good little mic, record your drums, dump them into GarageBand. Get a little just whatever, your iRig, track your guitars into that. I was able to make demos for everybody, put them on our little on our thread, communication thread, and Jim, and I would tell Jim, hey Jim, this is a song. Yeah, there's a beginning and an end, and there's choruses and all. This is a completed song, but none of this is completed until if you've got an idea, if you want to weigh in with something like, hey, I got a spot here, there's something here that I can do. Why don't you try changing this from here to there? Any of that you want to throw in? Anybody, Eric, Goss, Ron, for that, anything you guys think, and Jim especially, just let me know. And Jim would always let me know, like, hey, dude, these are great. You're kicking ass, man. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, okay, well, we're just going to keep on moving forward. So that's where that goes. So
Yeah, it's just so crazy how easy it is to do demos now. It's like just go on an app, just upload the drum track, then like upload the riff. You can move it around. It's so easy now. It's crazy like hearing people talk about doing demos in the 80s and stuff. It's like, oh, we have it so easy now. Like bands, that's why there's so many bands now. And it's also easy to upload their stuff to Spotify and get their stuff out there. Which before I let you go, I got to ask you, whose idea was it to not have this on Spotify?
Strictly our management's, because that was a surprise to me because I thought that this was going to be on Spotify. I had no idea until, really the album's coming out. And that was just one of those, I just thought it was going to be a necessary evil, because that's an aspect of the music industry that I'm familiar with. However, the ever-changing contractual situations that are going on between artists and Spotify right at this moment are right at a crux where of course, there are a lot of artists who are pulling their material from Spotify and they're not releasing things. And any Dark Angel material that's already on Spotify, that's nothing to do with us. That's all Sony. That's not us.
Really?
We did put one song, Circular Firing Squad. We have no control over our old material. That's all Sony. We're doing our best to wrest control away from Sony, but they did that. I've never signed a contract, one iota, for material of ours to be on Spotify. We don't have downloads or whatever the Spotify visits that a Metallica or a Taylor Swift or any of the big bands of the world do. So I've never received a dime from Spotify. We never have. And right now it's starting to the terms of use between terms of service, I guess, between artists and Spotify and all the other companies right now are definitely in a very strange place. So the management had said, look, we're going to keep this thing off Spotify because the situation that you see a lot of bands, they're pulling their material from it because they can't get behind this streaming stuff. And B, it sounds terrible on Spotify. Like Spotify, I know they promised a lossless version of themselves for years and years, but they have yet to unveil it. And so that was another thing. And so our album was not recorded for MP3 sort of approach, I guess, because this album was a very, very organically recorded record. It's all live instruments, live playing, no gridding, no auto tuning, no looping, no like, hey, you got this great riff right here, just cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste. There's your verse, and then your chorus riff. Oh, that's a good version there. Cut, paste, cut, paste. None of that. There's no sound replacing on the drums. There's no. That's why the drums have the whole record breathes, and that was another insistence by our management, who was our engineer for this record, Rob Shawcross, he was a producer for it. He insisted on doing it that way. And, I push back on everything, on most things where I'm like, is this a good idea? Should we just record the album like everybody else does? It's going to be a crap load cheaper to just, hey, Lara's got a Pro Tools system and a little station at home. We track that thing right there, and do we have to come up to Vancouver? I understand, there's studios here in San Diego where I can record some drums at, it's not the Armory, but there's good studios here. Can we do that? Save a crap load of money, like shit tons of money by doing it the same way everybody else does, the way it's been done for the last 25 years. Everybody can be a recording artist in their garage, in their basement, kind of thing, in their second bedroom kind of thing. And he was insistent on not doing it that way. And so therefore I think the album has turned out differently than most records today. but I will freely admit, man, I shut down all listening to all other musics when I started working on Extinction level event, and I've been very slow to get back into checking other things out. What's the current state of anybody these days, you know? But also, one thing I do know, and I understand this from my management standpoint. He's like, dude, all records just kind of sound like this these days. And he's like, tons of albums that you're on, they sound like this, man. You know, you've got some great recordings and great performances, but you know, every drum song sounds exactly the same to each other. And I'm like, I understand that. Every guitar tone the exact same and all that stuff. So let's try to have Dark Angel, at least for Dark Angel, just to separate themselves from Dark Angel. Just let's utilize some of those modern properties of things, you know. I mean, we were able to do that, but we did retain a very old school approach to recording. You know, this is all live recordings captured, you know, live amps, you know, we went through a ton of amps to figure out the ones we wanted, and a ton of guitars, and then before we settled on everything that we settled on, we tried a whole bunch of stuff. And so we just tried to get the best tones going into it, and we didn't sound replace anything. We didn't reamp anything. And when it came time for the mix, you know, that's another thing. Like we used Mike Frazier as our mixer. Google Mike Frazier, you'll see what he's done. He's a legend of mixing. He's worked on a lot of legendary records, and he's done some strapping albums. You know, he mixed The New Black from Strapping. So Mike and I go back a long way, and so utilizing his expertise was quite the coup for us. And so it is an old school approach to mixing. It's not like we could just call up our mixer and say, hey man, can I get a little more bass on this track? Or can we get the kick drums just up a little bit? Yeah, sure, give me a couple hours. I'll pull it up on the file and I'll get you another file in a couple hours. No, that's not how it worked. We did do a few recall days in the studio. And that means we had to get Mike out to the Armory Studios where he mixed it, rent the studio again, you know, put in the time to get it a recall mix, you know. And when it came to mastering, you know, I'm always pushing back on everything. I know we had this approach on the mixing, so is that working with the mastering? Let's try these other, you know, we got like kind of 3 versions of each song sort of thing. A lot of times when you're mixing these days and you're mixing to, you know, a home studio, you got some good speakers, whatever, you can have 30 mixes, you know, you can have 10 passes of a song. Bass up, kick drums up, guitars up, vocals down, guitars down, kick drums, all that. You can have numerous versions of it. We got 3, you know, of each song. We got 3, man.
Yeah.
And so if we had to go in and remix anything, like I said, like we did, that took some effort. You know, it took some scheduling. It took some, you know, some fundraising, you know, kind of thing. So
right.
That's how it works. So.
Well, I, love to hear that as a fan. It's like, I wish more bands did this. It's like these legacy bands that put out new material. It's like, all right, set all the knobs to this, let's just throw it in Pro Tools and just chop it all up. And just hearing this approach really makes me appreciate this record even more. And yeah, I do agree with the Spotify thing. I have a CD on the way of this record that I can't wait to get because I miss that. I miss having the copy, spinning it in my car. I have a stereo too. Instead of just like this whole single culture of like, it's all singles and all the, I don't know. I really do appreciate that. Now, I just got to ask, what's your opinion on AI use in album art?
I don't care. Like we utilize some AI on our stuff.
Yeah.
I think that the general public is under a very they aren't quite aware of all the actual computer art that we did put onto our AI stuff. I understand the new AI generation is very anti-AI. I don't care. I like kick-ass art, and our artists our artist, Kane Gillis, it took us 3 years to put the artwork together for this. And a lot of it came from my concepts, because I tried to, and that's one thing you'll see on the deluxe packages or whatever. Each song has its own panel with its own artwork, which for the most part, where we could, we tied it into the subject matter of the song. And it's kick-ass artwork. Kick-ass art is kick-ass art. When people started putting art on computers, doing computer-generated art, 40 years ago, I'm sure the artists who were paintbrushing and doing pointillism and all that kind of stuff were like, what are you doing this on a computer? This isn't an artist. What are you doing? This is a travesty. Just like 25 years ago when people stopped buying albums, CDs, cassettes, and started downloading and ripping songs off the internet. Same sort of thing. That was the technology at the time. And those of us who were like, hey, we survive on album sales. And everybody 25 years ago was like, you mean I can just go on my computer and pull my favorite band off the internet and just get their albums for free? I can do that? And we're like, yes, and that technology's been around for a while, but please don't, because you're going to kill our industry. Sure enough, that happened. So now streaming services where no band makes any money anymore, like that.
Yeah, they made Napster legal.
And those are the same people then, that it's the same mindset now that doesn't want to actually explore or possibly listen to me when I'm saying, look, there's photography in our new artwork, like Kane is out there taking pictures of things and blending them into that. And Kane is doing tons of computer stuff and I am no artist, I am no computer person at all. But I understand there's a bit of a backlash, and I'm like, well, hey, if you want to deny yourself the pleasure of the Dark Angel music because you have your viewpoints, which I'm not saying they're misguided, but I don't think people have quite understood. Like I said, people didn't understand 20 years ago when it's like, wow, these bands are, putting a lot of money into these records, and now we're just taking them for free. We're listening to their music for free. I don't care about the band, and the fans are like, I'll I'll buy the ticket to the show. I'll buy the t-shirt. Not everybody can be able to do that, and so, so I understand that. So,
yeah,
hey, everybody's got their opinion. Me, I don't care. I love our artwork, and if our opinions disagree on it, then hey, man, fair enough. I'm going to have a different opinion, but I know exactly all the work that went into this. It's I will say one thing: if anybody thinks our artist Kane just typed in a sentence into an AI generator and out popped this perfect piece of artwork, that is absolutely not anywhere near the case. So it took tons of work to get our actual human work. Kane told me he spent over, I think it was 2,000 hours on the artwork for this record. If you charge an artist, have an artist charge you by the hour, then keep that in mind. And and I think that's another thing where people say it takes the money out of the artist's pocket. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. This is our artist. I said, do what you do. I want art like this. Do what you want, man. You're our artist. You figure it out. And then he would send me things, and he's like, "This is an incomplete thing. This took me 6 days to figure out rendering this, working on this pretty solidly. I have all this work that I have to do to it, and then I'd be like, yeah, I like this one. We have thousands of pieces of art all built up in certain modes of completion. And so that's where that goes. And if you want to crab at us, that's fine. It rarely reaches me. I've never done anything to have, I've never been in a position where I've been able to allow other, like, I guess, people whom I don't know their background, so that's never going to affect my approach on things or what comes from my heart. So I don't like, if somebody, like I've said this before, if I'm like, hey man, I don't know what it takes to run a football team, so I can't go to Jerry Jones and say, dude, what are you doing with the Cowboys? He's like, well, you only see this much of what happens in running a football team, and you think you know everything, Gene. Let me explain all this and this and this and this and this that actually might happen. Then you might catch the drift of, you don't know what you're talking about, Gene. And I'll be like, you're right, I don't. It's like somebody who installs HVAC systems, heating and air conditioning units, ventilation and air conditioning units. I know nothing about the craft or the art or the industry of it, so I can't tell a guy what to do. And so I guess I'm kind of on that sort of mode. It's like if I'm no expert at anything. One thing I'm pretty good at is the music of metal, music. I'm no pop music fan. I couldn't tell you a Taylor Swift song or a Nicki Minaj song or whoever is big. I couldn't tell the difference between any of those artists, so I can't weigh in on what's good or what's bad, and so I don't. And when it comes to whatever it is that I do, I've just always just kind of listened to myself, and my instincts were like, well, I guess this form of this approach is here. We're not the first person to utilize it, but our artwork is definitely not solely AI at all.
2,000 hours. That's no
Yeah.
that's no just like typing in a prompt and then boom,
No.
there's the album art. Yeah, that's definitely a lot of effort was put into that, it seems. Yeah.
Right. And when this was started, there was not quite as, I guess, as vocal a backlash as possibly there is for anybody who utilizes it now, but we are not the first. We are definitely not going to be the last. So you can find it. And I appreciate those 25 years ago. Anybody today who fights the streaming and says, I'm going to buy the physical product, I know a lot of my friends have reached out to me and said, I love the new album. It sounds great. I love the artwork. This is killer. So I hear differently. But I'm definitely told by the management and other elements of people who are close. I'm not much of an online person. I don't have the time for it. I'm amazed at people who can sit there on Instagram and take pictures of their meals and post those and be online and crabbing about things. That's amazing. You might have the time for that. I got a life that I'm leading and living, and there's no time to even go on. I don't read reviews. I don't, I hear from cats like yourself. When you tell me, hey man, I dig the new record. That's the only time I hear it, other than my friends going, hey man, I've heard the new album. I love it. Maybe the friends who have heard the album and haven't reached out to me, like by text, maybe those guys don't like it. But, get a lot of texts from my friends going, hey man, great work. We're into it. And it's when I do a Zoom call or an interview with somebody and they give me their opinion, like you did on the album. Those are the only opinions I hear, and there's been a couple of guys that have said, hey, I hear this backlash about the vocals and it's not Darkness Descends, it's not Time Does Not Heal. I'm like, well, it's not supposed to be, and I've always said that, if you listen vocally, even just vocally, to any Dark Angel album, let alone the entire album, no Dark Angel album has ever followed the path of the previous records.
Exactly.
We've never had two albums sound alike, and we're never going to do that. If there's another Dark Angel album, it's not going to sound like this one exactly. We're not going to cookie cutter this thing, and just like we didn't make it sound like Darkness Descends, or we didn't make it sound like Time Does Not Heal. there's a couple of elements here and there because it's Dark Angel, but that's where trying to write an album that sounds like Dark Angel right here and now in this time frame, that was the fun challenge to do rather than like, hey, do I want to copy Darkness Descends? No. Do I want to copy Time to Not Heal or any of the other records? No, I don't want to do that. So that made the approach very easy to work with. It's like, hey, just try to make it a very, where would Dark Angel be now if Dark Angel just kept putting out records for the last 30 plus years? Where would we be at here in 2025 putting out the new album? And so anybody who has, seen past whatever issues they might have with artwork and just gotten to the music, that's what I care about. The artwork, it's like, that's just a challenge to come up with. That's a necessary evil,
Yeah.
You got it. And we tried to take it one step further. And that is one thing that a lot of my friends in the industry are saying, wow, man, bands do not do that, where you've got an artwork per panel. Song 1 has its own, song 2 has its own, song 3 has its own artwork that's dedicated to the songs. Nobody does that. And I'm like, shows you how much I pay attention, because I didn't know this was a novel approach, and that is for our deluxe packages, but
well, that's what's great. You're rewarding people who are, getting the physical media. It's not just like grab this, one disc. There's no inner sleeve. There's nothing. It's like, it's cool to get like, art for each panel. Like, you're really caring for the people who are like spending money on the deluxe package, on physical media. And as a fan, like, we really appreciate that, because you're putting in the extra effort.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, we did try. It was like, that was where it's been so long, and our fans have always been there with us, and so, hey, number one, we wanted to put out a great record, music. That's it for me. All the other necessary evils, let's kind of up that a little bit and make it really special for everybody who wants to really devote time and effort and of course, finances towards having a kick-ass payoff of waiting 34 years. Look what they gave us, kick-ass. We do have the simpler packages, but they all have kick-ass work to them. And ultimately the music is that's the most important part of us doing what we're doing. So that's the thing that I just want people to really get a grasp on is, hey, musically, Dark Angel stepped up. This is a kick-ass record. Who else is putting out kick-ass records like Dark Angel is? I'm sure there's a ton of bands, man, but at least Dark Angel is stepping up their game from their last album, which came out 30 plus years ago. And they're trying to step it up a little bit. So there you go.
Well, I'm happy to live in a world where we do have a new Dark Angel record. It's out now. Go get it. It's on YouTube as well if you don't have any money. But Gene, just an absolute pleasure to talk to you and meet you. So thank you.
Appreciate it, man. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, before we end things here, is there anything I missed you want to plug for the future of the band and yourself?
Well, right now I'm not sure when this airs. However, we are entering the final few shows of the Extinction level event run. This tour ends in Los Angeles on October 16th, I believe, and October 15th, we are in Berkeley. And since it's already October 11th, we are in Portland tonight, Seattle on October 12th. So and so we're down to like the last 4 shows, maybe 4 or 5 shows, something like that. So come on and check it out, man. It's a kick-ass night of metal, and let me tell you, if you need to go to YouTube, catch some recent Dark Angel shows, you'll see how intense our shows are. And I know that's like, I don't pay attention to what people say, but the rest of the band does. And they're like, hey, man, this guy is saying, man, this is the most intense show that he's ever seen, kind of thing. So we are definitely bringing it every night. And you want to see an intense metal show, you do not want to miss Dark Angel and all of the bands that we're out on tour with. Absolutely.
I have to admit, I have listened to a few of the bootlegs out there, and this band hasn't slowed down a bit. Just absolute fucking killer. Really awesome stuff. And again, just great talking to you. And what's the best way for people to stay updated with everything Dark Angel?
Well, hit the socials, like the album is available from reversedrecords.com. And the download for those who are like, man, I just download my music, that's it, but I will purchase. I think our album is on sale for $7.99. The entire album, I think it's $7.99. Who else is doing that, man? We're not, like maybe other bands are doing that, but you can get an entire 11-song record right to your device for under $8, $7.99. Man, that's pretty damn cool. Who doesn't? That's the price of a cup of coffee. You want to go get one of them Starbucks, latte pumpkin jobbers. That thing's pushing $7. So that's really it. You can't get a cheeseburger at any of the major chains for that kind of price. So shoot, man, you can get a lifetime of music for that price, man. $7.99. Check out reverserecords.com if you're so inclined. Pay attention to the socials. That'll always keep you up to date on what's happening. I will definitely jab in the plug for the Death to All.
Yes.
Symbolic Healing Tour, which is starting directly after this one. In two weeks, we're going to be out on the road with Death to All, bringing Symbolic in its entirety, and we're leaning pretty heavily on spiritual healing that night as well. But we're playing all, the entire catalog. We're definitely representing the entire Death album trajectory. We're playing songs from every record, leaning heavily on two of them, one especially, and then the other one we're gonna, have some thoughts on how we want to represent spiritual healing, but Symbolic is going to be in its entirety. And so, and that's the, and every album is going to get represented, and that's the only way to represent Death is by playing the entire catalog, representing the entire thing. We are not a band that says, well, hey man, Steve, you were on Human, me and Bobby were on Symbolic, and then, Steve, you and I were on, individual thought patterns. So let's just play those three albums. We don't do that because we can play everything. We got the chops to play everything, so we do. That's why we do that. So there you go. That's why Death to All is a singular band, the only one of our kind, with ex-members of Death who know how to represent Death's music and care enough about it to run the gamut with the catalog, with the legacy of Chuck's music, the legacy of Chuck Schuldiner, our legacy too. Like it's been pointed out to us that, hey, you guys were an important part of these albums. So, you're representing yourselves as well. And I'm like, that's a very cool observation. So, that's something to consider. The nights are great. We're out with Gore Guts and Homophobic, I believe. And it's going to be a night of killer metal. Like I said, like I always say with all of my bands, man, you do not want to be getting that phone call the next day going, where were you? You missed something. And this is representing a pretty historically classic metal record in the canons of metal. Not my words, but other people saying what they say about Symbolic, and getting to see that album in its entirety. We will be playing Symbolic songs that have never been played live before,
So awesome.
Yeah, so you definitely want to see that. So excellent.
Yeah, awesome stuff. I will have to see that. Just an amazing celebration of Death. And again, Gene, great talking to you. And again, thank you for being on the podcast. Really does mean a lot.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it. Just we look forward to seeing you on the road, and any of your viewers, come on and check out Dark Angel, check out Death to All. I know there's going to be some announcements from some of my other projects coming up very soon, like Bear McCreary just announced that the Deathstalker 2 soundtrack that we did with Slash That's coming out very soon. That just got released yesterday, I believe, the new song there. And so one of my other major projects, one of my other major bands is going to have an announcement very soon about some things coming up in 2026 that are very, very exciting for metal fans. So keep your eyes open and you'll be getting pretty darn sick of Hoglan by the time 2026 is over.
You're a busy man and we love to see it. What can I say? Well, yeah, I'm Brandon Battick and this has been Disturbing the Priest.
It's death. I've just seen death.